Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. Before we kick off today, can you please check your settings? You should be able to see this on the screen, saying make sure your volume's set appropriately, make sure you follow the instructions on your right-hand toolbar, and make sure everything's plugged in properly. If you do have any difficulties, so if you have any audio or visual difficulties, there's a chat box and a question box in the panel that you can pop a question into. So if someone could do that now, just to let me know it's working, and I will respond ASAP, or one of the team will respond as soon as possible. And let's kick off. So welcome. The webinar today is about designing trust relationships in research with Knowsi. Our speaker is Andrew Lovett-Barron. So Andrew, a bit about Andrew. He is the creator of Knowsi, which is a new software tool that empowers researchers to manage participant consent in line with data protection regulations. Andrew is the winner of our 2020 concept grant. For those who aren't familiar with it, please do check out the Sage Ocean concept grants. We offer grants to new tools or tool ideas each year that will support research. So Andrew won it this year, along with 5 other winners who won our small new idea tool winners. You can read about that at ocean.sagepub.com/concept grants. So before I hand over to Andrew today, first of all, can people let me know that you can hear okay? If someone can drop a question in the question box, and I'll just drop a question in the chat so everyone can see. Yes, thanks very much. I can see people coming in. Okay, so throughout this session today, you can ask questions either through this question box or through Twitter using the hashtag SageTalks. I'm Amy Sparrow. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Sage Ocean. I'll be monitoring these questions and we'll ask them to Andrew for the Q&A at the end. If we run out of time, so someone's question doesn't get answered, don't worry, we'll be capturing them all and Andrew will do a Q&A blog at the end that we will send out. So don't worry, put your questions throughout, they will be asked at the end, and if anything's missed, we will send that out in a follow-up blog. We'll also be sending a recording of the webinar out. That should come a couple of days after this. You'll receive an email from GoTo with a recording, links to anything Andrew's spoken about, and the Q&A blog. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Andrew today. And yes, sorry, I saw questions come in. The presentation will be sent around to you. The slides will be sent around to you. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew now, and welcome to the webinar, everyone.
Hello. Let me just set up my camera. See if this is working. Cool.
Yep,
can you guys
see
me and I'm not completely reversed?
And no, you're not reversed. Just before you start, Andrew, I'm going to ask people to put in the chat box, has anyone got any visual or audio issues, or can you all see Andrew? They're saying you're frozen, Andrew. Can is this a photo or are you frozen? I've got a few people who's frozen.
No, I don't think I'm frozen. I'm seeing the sort of feedback on the screen. I'm just sort of looking back and forth between my 2 monitors.
Okay, all right. Maybe we'll start off if you, now we can see it and people are coming through. Unfrozen now, I can see a lot of people saying they can see.
Okay.
Cool. The image is lagging a bit. A couple of people are having trouble. I'll respond to a couple of you directly, but it's working for me. And if it carries on, if you're lagging, can we turn off the video and just do the slides? But this is Andrew, everyone.
Hi, folks. Cool. Yeah. So I'll get started. I'm fiddling around with a bit of a weird technology setup, so I appreciate everyone's patience and dealing with my affinity. Oh, and this is my dog Moon in the background. Hey, girl. Okay, let's jump in. So today I'm going to talk about building trust relationships in research, specifically also in the context of the application I've been developing called Knowsi. To give you a sense of the overall schedule, we're going to be looking at just a very quick introduction. We're going to dive straight into designing the participant experience and taking a look at a couple of tools and a couple of different ways to think about designing that experience for research participants. I'll give you a quick intro to Knowsi. I'm trying not to make this too much of a sort of like, pitch to use my app, but also, I think it's the best. So, you should use the app. and then we can do a Q&A afterwards. So quick intro to myself. This is me. Also, that is me in the bottom left-hand corner.
To interrupt. I think you're still lagging. You might have to turn off your video camera and just do the slides. Is that okay?
Yes. Let me see if I can. Can I do
I think it's just the video.
Give me 2 seconds.
No worries. Sorry, everyone. Always have technical issues.
Hopefully.
Let us know if that's better in the chat box. I think people are saying that's better. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, cool. You don't have to see my mug anyway. It's better. So yeah, this is me. I'm Andrew. I'm the founder of Knowsi and Stupid Systems. So Knowsi is a consent management application, and Stupid Systems is my consultancy, and also is a sort of owning entity of Knowsi itself. Twitter, email, feel free to drop me a line. So I'm coming from a bit of a varied background. I'm primarily coming to this world from design research, and that was actually the sort of genesis of where Knowsi came from. So I was leading research and sort of product design, software design with teams at IDEO, which is a global design consultancy. Later on, I was at the U.S. Digital Service in the Department of Defense, working what was called the Defense Digital Service team, doing kind of design research and product design within the Department of Defense. I've also been with New America, doing some research with social enterprises and trying to understand how they work, specifically from a capital perspective, as well as the Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design and working with them, both leading startup mentorship with their Interfounder program. They're part of the Innovation Fund Denmark piece, and with different clients like Mozilla, IKEA, and similar. I'm actually located in Denmark. I don't speak any Danish, unfortunately. There's some very difficult vowels in that language. I'm originally a sort of Canadian/American dual citizen, kind of hybrid, going all over the place. And that's my son Emil, who's looking confused at this photo. And then just a sort of quick preview of Knowsi. I'll walk through Knowsi a little bit more later, but here are a couple of snapshots of some of the new designs that are coming up. So, small software startup is continuously getting redesigned, and this is a quick preview of the project dashboard, consent summaries, participant dashboards, and consent form generators, and we'll dig into that more a little bit later. So let's talk a little bit about designing the participant experience. I'm sorry, my dog has chosen this moment to start saying hello. So research participants these days have more rights and greater anxieties than ever. We're living in a world where privacy conversations are really coming to the fore, and it's sort of incumbent on us as designers and researchers to really try to understand how to create a great relationship with our participants to get the highest quality research and make sure that their rights are protected and the actual risk to our project is lowered as much as possible. And so there's a couple of different ways to think about the participant experience and the process of research itself. Here is one of potentially many different ideal recruiting cycles for the research process. So frequently, and one caveat I'll give sort of from the get-go is most of my experience is in private sector design research. So using generally qualitative or mixed methods to kind of gather knowledge and understanding of users or a market in order to drive a design process. So I've mostly worked in that context in the private sector. So not everything I'm saying here will be directly relevant in the context of academia. There's different rules, there's different contexts, especially with research ethics boards. So just take that as a point. My hope is that some of the tools that I'm providing here, or some of the ways of thinking about building trust here, will apply across both. So frequently this is the cycle that we tend to see, or the path that we tend to see described to us. So you identify the folk that you want to talk to, you contact them in some way, they respond, they consent, and frequently actually the consent process will take place at the exact same time as the interview, which I tend not to recommend. You'll schedule some time with the research participants, you'll interview them, and then you'll transcribe the information in some way and synthesize it in some way. The more likely path tends to look like this, where there's cycles of reminding and trying to get feedback from the participant who you want in your study. You're sort of contacting them again, reminding them, and similar. Same thing goes for the consent process. You're sort of like, hey, you know, I sent you this form, would you mind filling it out? We need this form in order to move forward with the study. There might be a reminding sort of flow in the scheduling piece as well. And then finally for interviews, there's frequently follow-up, asking for additional consents and similar.
Andrew, sorry to interrupt you there. We're having a couple of people who've had a bit of trouble viewing the slides. They've gone a little blurry. Do you mind stop presenting and then we can start yours again?
Okay.
If you mind, pause sharing your screen, start again. Sorry, everyone. I know for half the people are saying it's totally fine, and some people are saying it's blurry. So if you mind, start showing again, and it might just clear it up. And then if people can let us know if they can see it.
It's the old turn it on and off again method.
Yeah, I was going to say I can see it clearly. Can other people let us know? And there's a couple of people. Stanley, I know you were saying that, and Stanley and Amina were saying improve. Great. Is that fixed it for everyone? If anyone else is still having trouble, please let me know. It's clear. Okay, thank you very much. Carry on, Andrew. Sorry.
And just, you know, as a reminder, we'll be sharing the slides afterwards. I think there's a video of this going out in a couple of days. And then, yeah, I mean, if you have any direct questions, don't hesitate to either drop it in the chat or send me a direct note. So today's recruiting cycle is another sort of fun process where we also have to explicitly take into account some of the concerns around changing consent requirements as they relate to the GDPR and different sort of national and regional privacy legislation. So, for example, under the GDPR, one of the components is that consent needs to be as easily withdrawn as it is provided. And so making sure that the administration mechanisms are in place within your team and within your actual consent process itself to withdraw that consent if the participant so wishes is a very central thing. Adding on top of this, there's the complexity of who is actually doing what work. So frequently you'll have administrative teams, research admins, research ops, or recruiting services who are handling the sort of early stages, not necessarily identifying per se, but the contacting, responding, consenting, and scheduling parts. And then when the researcher actually goes and speaks to the participant, you know, suddenly it's a different person, and that really starts to shift up the participants' understanding of what it is that they're engaging in and who it is that they're talking to. And when it comes to these feedback cycles that are within this path of, you know, going from identification and recruiting all the way to sort of transcription and synthesis, things can get quite messy and things get lost in the cracks, like, for example, consent forms. But all of this is actually usually hidden from the research participant themselves. From their perspective, they're, you know, they get an email, they answer agree, they're asked to fill out a legal form, they agree to some kind of schedule or compensation, and then suddenly they're just talking to this person. And when we're thinking about creating the research administration process, we tend to be thinking about specifically like how do we make this easy for ourselves instead of thinking about explicitly like what is the experience for the participants themselves. And participants have a whole range of different concerns at every single phase in this process. When they get a cold email or an introduction, they're asking like, who is this person? Is this a scam? And you know, I've full on got into like, seriously, this is a scam. Don't DM me thing in the past, which is not great. You know, for the answering or agreeing step, they're still worried it's a scam. What happens afterwards? You know, it depends a lot on what exactly the initial email says. When they're sent this legal consent form asking to agree to something, they're asking, like, is this form legitimate? How am I protected? What's the name of the company? And often in a consent form, frequently in the past and even now, consent forms are quite maximalist in their approach to asking for consent, so that the research team has the maximum flexibility to collect media. This is particularly the case in the design research world, where we're trying to collect as much media as possible in order to construct a narrative and a story around our proposed design outcomes. So, you know, frequently a product will sort of make its way into that story. But that's not actually great, because if you're maximally collecting data, you're also responsible for making sure that that data is properly handled. And the more data you have, the more difficult it is to do. When they've agreed to scheduling, you know, is the compensation fair? Is it safe to go to the place that you've agreed to meet at? Or is it safe to have these people over to my home if they've asked to come see my home as a component of the research? And then when they're finally speaking to the researcher, this may not actually be the person that they had spoken to originally, which is a major cause for concern. It's not always clearly articulated that 2 or more people might be showing up, where you have a primary researcher and a second. Perhaps somebody who's also doing video recording. And the sort of nature of the questions and the awareness of being recorded can be issues as well. And so what I'm trying to sort of articulate here is just all of the different concerns that go into the participant experience and all these things that we can design around. So each stage in this process is an opportunity to build trust. And, you know, everything is focused around building rapport in some way, but ultimately, you know, building a good trust relationship from the very start of the recruiting process is building a strong foundation for getting high quality research. And, you know, ultimately what we want is high quality data and an efficient time with the participant, and for the participant to feel safe, secure, with their privacy respected. So talking about the participant experience, one of the ways that we can frame this discussion is using some of the language of service design. And I'm not sure how much you all are familiar with that. I would encourage taking a look or doing a quick Google around service design, perhaps after this chat. But one of the core principles is that you have a sort of front stage experience and back of stage experience. In addition, you have sort of norms, rules, regulations, and systems that inform how those things are structured. And so from the perspective of, well, I'll walk through this in a second, but sort of looking, can you all see the mouse? I'm presuming yes. So you have this.
Interrupt. I can see the mouse. We still have a couple of people having trouble seeing. Do you mind if I just? Oh yes, no, people are saying yes. I'm incorrect. If anyone can't see, can they say now, just in the chat box? I know there are a couple of issues.
I'm sure. I think like a lot of folk are, you know, hitting Netflix pretty hard right now. With quarantine.
Okay, there's some people who've got a bit blurry. Andrew, I'm going to get you to stop presenting again, give you control again, and just check if that works. Sorry, everyone. I think for some people, for me, it's working completely clearly, and I know for some people it is, but some people are having trouble. So hold on 1 second. And if you stop presenting, I'm going to give you control again and do it that way. Cool. So let's make you the presenter. Okay. Now you can do it again, share your screen, and then everyone, this should be better. You can reshare your screen now.
Okay. Sorry, I was asking for some more permissions. Can you all see it okay?
Hi everyone, is that better now? 1 second. Strong and clear, yes. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that, everyone. Teething issues, but it's clear now.
I will say it is supremely weird to be doing this kind of presentation with limited feedback. I'm just sort of pretending I'm talking to my dog right now. Okay, so jumping back, so looking at the participant experience from the sort of lens of front stage, backstage, norms and rules. So we're using the metaphor of basically a play of some sort, or theater, where you have all of this action that's happening on the stage. That's the experience that the participants are having, or that the viewer of the stage is having. But there's all of this activity happening in the backstage in order to make that experience realized, in order to make it happen, in order for it to come about. And then there are underpinning systems to all of that, which define how these different actions and actors interact, and how these artifacts come into play, and how they're interpreted, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll go through each of these in turn. And if this metaphor is confusing, just drop a note in the chat, and we can talk about it a little bit more in the QA. So specifically, front of stage, frequently from a research perspective, this manifests as the communication that you have with the participant. So introductions, researcher interactions, the environment where you do the research in, the consent form itself as a sort of artifact of the research experience, the response time. So feedback cycles in particular are a thing that we frequently ignore as a component of the research experience. And quick response times and awareness of participant needs is actually central to that, to the participant experience, and actually the brand of the research team as well. So coming from a reputable university or organization, I can tell you that my experience coming from a think tank like New America or a design firm like IDEO, let alone the DoD, was it was a little bit of a shock, not being like, it's very easy to land interviews when you have those names behind you, because they're things that people recognize to a certain extent. Whereas if you're coming from the context of, you have a tiny little bootstrap startup that people pronounce as, well, I mean, it is pronounced Knowsi. It's a little bit more difficult. And so, those are the direct artifacts, the direct actors of the participant experience. And the infrastructure that underpins behind that, like underpins all of those artifacts and actors, is the sort of backstage piece. So identifying who the participant is and making sure they're relevant to your study, the communication mechanisms that you apply in order to actually recruit the folk that you're trying to recruit, your data storage infrastructure, the project budget, which can have a huge impact on your response time, depending on how busy your team is, staffing and experience, and then actually having an administrative staff, or whether the research team is pulling double duty, which is also incredibly frequent. And then finally, the system underpinning that experience, the norms and rules that we're working within. So, I mean, data privacy legislation is a big focus for me. So looking at, like, are we working under the GDPR, e-privacy law? Are we working in Canada under PIPEDA? Are we working in California under CCPA? How do you actually engage with those different legislated privacy, privacy legislation, and then the norms sort of underpinning all of that? Different social norms, depending on who, what group it is that you're communicating with and working with. Institutional norms and technology constraints are actually a huge one too, as we've discovered while we've all been locked in a global pandemic. So ultimately, unfortunately, to a certain extent, every single research project is its own design exercise. So there's not, or at least I believe there's not a hard and fast sort of here's your research program in a box, go forth and learn. Every single project requires a critical interrogation of the defining factors of a participant's experience. And it requires us to critically understand what it is that we're trying to learn, who we're trying to learn from, and how we're going to get that data. But looking at best practices, useful tools, and well-considered heuristics can certainly help. So I'm going to try to walk you through 4 points within this process. The sort of answer, agree, or refuse is one that I'm still trying to crack myself. So I won't dig too deeply into that one. But we're going to look at just doing clear first communications, gathering simple consents, centralizing scheduling, and then developing a rapport with the participants. So clear first communication. Who is this person? These initial concerns are always pretty difficult, and ultimately the goal of this step is to get interest. Like if you're sending out either an introduction or initial request, what you're trying to do is get a response back so you can engage the participant or the potential participant in some form of dialogue. So front of stage, the actual artifacts of that experience tend to be, it's the email or the phone call or the introduction that you have with that participant. And just on the side here, here's a sort of example email that you might send out to a participant, just like a cold email, like, hey, this is what's going on. I found you on this community, et cetera, et cetera. Provide a clear introduction with context, speak to some explicit reasons why they are being contacted, and set the expectation about what is coming next. So, the introduction is usually kind of the biggest piece. Like you don't want somebody to immediately delete the email, but there's a lot of reasons why the email might be deleted, but if they see it, you want to make sure that you have that hook to pull them in. Back of stage, there's a bunch of things that make this whole process easier. Specifically, having ready-to-go email templates can allow you to react more quickly to finding the right participant and sending them that information. Establishing why you should be trusted comes to the affiliation piece, but also having public content. Frequently, potential participants will go out and search for you on Google or really it's just Google now, unfortunately. But they'll specifically look you up and try to figure out if you're reputable. There's ways around this, but it's something to be careful of. And then make sure that you always have additional infrastructure set up and ready to go, so you're able to respond quickly if they get a response. And then just some norms and rules to keep in mind. Communication standards will differ across groups as well as communication mediums and similar, so just be careful about that. Thinking about how your communication comes across is something like in research recruiting emails that I've received as a potential participant. One of the things that strikes me the most is that they feel very spammy, like they feel like the kind of nonsense that you get over LinkedIn. And you don't want that. You don't want to send somebody just a form email. You want to be able to provide some considered personalization about why it is that you're contacting them. Otherwise, it comes off as marketing email, or worse, it's a deposed prince who's seeking to somebody to share his millions with. While he gets to wherever you are. And then finally, the core technology stack is actually a fairly, a very infrequently considered, but very important piece. So an example of this is that if you are sending emails from a web server that is connected in some way to a mailing list or marketing, say like through MailChimp, often those emails will get pushed to spam because spam filters are recognizing a particular source. And so there's a couple of ways to get around this. You can make sure that the domain that you're sending from, that you have some monitoring around the DMARC policies. There's making sure that your domain is properly set up. There's lots of really good tutorials around this, and if you are sending emails from a custom domain and not Gmail or not your academic URL, I very much encourage you to look some of this stuff up and make sure that you're set up properly, because I mean, for Knowsi, it made the difference between every single email we sent going to spam to every email getting past the spam filter, and specifically having a higher score. And then sort of, if you want to learn a little bit more, there's a link on the Knowsi website to this article I wrote, which is just the anatomy of a research recruitment email. And I'd encourage you to give that a read, and please steal the template if it's useful. Steal all of it. Okay, so moving on, we're looking at the simple consent experience. As you can imagine, you're going to imagine what my recommendations are. So clearly and simply communicate the ask. Make sure you're upfront about the research goals. Make sure that you are explicit about why you need the participants' consent and how you are going to use that data. Provide a mechanism to be contacted afterwards. So make sure the participant can reach out and change their consent or ask questions or express concerns afterwards. Provide a mechanism to withdraw consent, ideally an automated mechanism. And just realize that for some people, the consent process isn't going to matter materially for them in any way. They will just sign the form and carry on. For others, it will be a complete deal breaker. And just being conscious of those different experiences and those different needs is part of designing this part of the participant experience. On Backstage, this is often where specifically things fall apart. One of my most, and this was actually part of the inspiration to build Knowsi in the first place, was I was leading a research project in London, and we were flying back to San Francisco, and nobody could find our consent forms. And so as a consequence, we were not able to use any of the media that we collected in London for this particular project. And it sucked. It really, really sucked. And just the process of managing all of these signed consents is incredibly fraught, depending on where you are. So, you know, sometimes you'll have a team that's incredibly rigorous about it. I saw some like incredible practices at IDEO, for example, where like there were specific places to store it. We had a really good process in place, et cetera, et cetera. Other places, you know, the consent forms never actually leave the project team. They get shredded with, you know, with the Post-it notes and similar, which, you know, if you're using the media that came out of that research in any way, or if you're using the information that came out of that research in any way, you have to save that for a certain period of time. And so just having a consistent place and process to store all of this is vital. And then also making sure all your media is appropriately tagged and associated with the consents, so that if consent is withdrawn or somebody asks that they, you know, their information, their data not be used in some way, you can reference it back and delete it. And there's a couple of ways to do that, which I'm not going to go into, but yeah, proper tagging and similar is vital. And here's a quick screenshot of from Knowsi, the screen that participants see if they're going in and updating their consent in an automated way. And then finally, just realizing that expectations around photography and audio recording differ pretty wildly across groups. So when you're designing your consent form, being sensitive from the get-go to what those expectations might be. And realizing, like, you know, maybe if you're talking to a particular community that doesn't want their photo used in a corporate deck or on a website or in a research report, not even asking that, just figuring out a different way to tell those stories. Always have a backup. So if somebody doesn't consent to something, for example, recording, making sure that you are a really quick note taker, that the second on your research team is a really quick note taker, and then understanding regional laws and norms is just going to be a vital part of any of this. So, you know, for example, if you're researching with somebody from the EU or within the European Union, you have to respect the GDPR and the consent laws tied to that. I would highly recommend you use Knowsi. I don't know, it's a pretty cool app. I would give it a go. You're all going to get a a extended trial code as well to use. So one thing I'll toss out, Knowsi is always going to be free to use for smaller projects. So you don't have to worry about signing up or anything like that to give it a try. But if you need additional features, so more consents per month, or very specifically things like publicly accessible consent forms instead of tailored ones, then there's a pro or paid feature, and you're all going to get that for 3 months for free. So basically for the rest of the year, if you would like it. So yeah, pay attention to this and use Knowsi. It's great. Been a lot of work. Centralized scheduling is another really big one, making sure this is easy. So my general philosophy around scheduling and with the goal of trying to get the participant to the actual interview process so that you can talk to them as fluidly and simply as possible, where they feel like you're competent, they're trusting your expertise, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want them to really be thinking at all. So you want to give them very, very clear and obvious next steps at every step in the process. Usually when it comes to scheduling options, if you're not using an automated tool like Calendly or some other, I'm not really sure what else really is out there, but some other tool to allow them to pick from a selection that you have, you want to give them only 2 to 4 different options so that they very quickly zero in on the one that works for them, and then you can go from there. And then always send a reminder 1 to 2 days before the actual research session, because for most participants, and just having interviewed a couple of former research participants to try to understand what their experience was, they completely blank on this thing and won't necessarily even put it in their calendar. So providing some kind of reminder, making sure that they'll be present either at their home or at the place where the research is taking place is critical. Tools like Calendly will also often do that automatically. But yeah, I would very much encourage that, and also thinking through what that sort of reminder text is going to be. Backup stage, really the critical thing here is having a centralized tracking solution. Specifically, this is the template that I've developed over time. So this is how I track everything. This particular one was from a study I was doing with Mozilla. So we were sort of looking at a cross section of the open source ecosystem, and it was me and one other researcher, and yeah, this is how we managed to consent. I will send this out on the Knowsi newsletter sometime this weekend. So if you sign up for that, I can send you the this actual Excel template, and please use it. It's been incredibly useful for me. I tend to pass it on to all of my students. It's great. The other part of this is that I'm also going to be adding some scheduling and calendaring features to Knowsi, which will hopefully be available in December or January, that are based off of this core tool. So if you find ways of extending this tool, please tell me. But yeah, like the main thing here is just making sure all of this stuff is centralized. And then the biggest thing from the norms perspective is punctuality. Building buffers into your research scheduling to allow for participants to be late, because that happens, is a really good way of making sure that both their experience is protected, but also other people you might be talking to have a good experience, because you'll actually be showing up on time. And then always give yourself time to travel, travel and to arrive a little bit ahead of time. Again, there was another London trip where I arrived at the location and spent about 15 minutes trying to figure out how to get into the building, with the participant telling me over and over again over the phone, this is how you do it, this is how you do it, and we were talking about different streets. So yeah, always be early. I wrote a little bit about designing some of these research trips. Again, this link, you can get to it from the Knowsi landing page, but there's just some tools and techniques to design this experience both for yourself and for the participant. And then finally, actually developing a rapport. This really comes down to good interview techniques. So pay attention to the sort of different artifacts of attention. So this is the sort of like speaking face to face, making sure there's a sort of physicality to your presence and to your attention. Don't have a laptop between you and the participant if you're speaking face to face, or an obvious sort of like if you're on Zoom interviewing somebody, the best way to shut down a conversation is to look at your phone. So just paying attention to how this environment that the participant is experiencing is designed, and what that says for your paying attention to their story and their willingness to open up to you is really central. And then the sort of performative qualities of openness are another piece to this. So not crossing your arms, paying attention to your expression, having a neutral expression, nodding and sort of like writing down to sort of acknowledge, even if you're not necessarily, like even if they're not telling you something interesting or relevant to the research, it's still a way to build that trust iteratively over time. And then always schedule time early on, like 10 to 15 minutes at least, to just talk to your participant and try to understand them as much as possible. And that time, you might not get anything that's directly relevant to the research, but you're developing a trust relationship with that participant that will then sort of pay off once you get into the meat of your questions. So for me, I always write specific interview forms with each group that I'm talking to, but I don't treat this as a script. I think I was originally taught to treat interview scripts as scripts, but at least my experience specifically has been that treating it as a checklist where you're trying to get to a couple of core pieces is a really strong way to just make sure you get through the interview, and it allows you to go down tangents that the participant might identify or might bring up, or that you didn't expect. It's fun. It's the thing that makes this kind of research fun for me personally, and hopefully for you guys too. And then this won't always be the case for the research you're doing, especially if you have a specific protocol that you have to follow, or a specific survey that you're implementing. But iterating on the research guide after each day of research or each session of research tends to be a really strong way to just build a better guide over the course of a particular project or program. So building some time at the end of the day to debrief is really central. And then, norms here, just being sensitive to cultural norms and needs is always a big piece. Having somebody who can potentially help you navigate these is also highly recommended. So if you're doing research from a cultural context or with communities that you don't have a lot of personal experience with or expertise with, just, finding somebody who can help be a fixer and a communicator within that community will help immensely. And then always be willing to extend additional privacy proactively to the participant. So if a participant is expressing body language that indicates that they're uncomfortable about something, proactively extending like, hey, like, do you want me to stop recording? Hey, do you want us to put away the camera? Those kind of questions, even if the participant has consented, goes a long way to building that kind of trust. And also sort of fixing that asymmetric power relationship that research participants and researchers have, because it can be uncomfortable. All I can recommend, these are some really great books that have helped me through the process. Two of these are actually Ian Chipchase, who's pretty great. Designing Social Inquiry, probably everybody knows, or a lot of folk know from the social science context. And then this book here, the IDEO Book of Design and Research Ethics. I think you can find this online on IDEO.com, but I'd suggest taking a look at this. And then finally, yeah, all of these are good. The Convivial Toolbox is also pretty interesting, just for sets of conversation tools and tools that you can apply in designing the research experience at that particular point of interacting with the participant as well. So that is the trust building piece. I will gun through this Knowsi section super fast so we have time for Q&A.
You've got time, it's okay.
We'll go quick. So yeah, these are just a bunch of slides about Knowsi where I talk in a high floating fashion, but I'll walk you through a little bit of what the interface looks like. So, once you create an account, you always have this organization that you're oriented around. You could add additional people to the organization. And then you'll have these different projects, and the projects are around which you organize a particular research program or project. So these will have consent forms and they will have participants. There's easy ways to create and generate different forms. One of the big things that'll be coming up soon is a full form template manager. So I'm hoping to capture a couple of different consent forms from different universities that I know and have relationships with, and just having those inside a template manager. So they can be used by anyone. And you will also be able to generate your own templates. There's a bit of a consent wizard as well, which is going to be getting an update too. And so you can define required consents, which your team will need, as well as optional consents. When you send a form to a participant, there is a mechanism that is still in beta to do different translated forms. So there is the possibility of doing multilingual forms. It's just a little... It works, it just doesn't have a full language coverage right now, unfortunately. They'll get some of the information about the consent form up front. They'll be asked to fill out some of their, their name or confirm it if you've put in their name for them. And then they can easily fill out their consents and contact options. There's legal language and plain language used there. And then they can just sign and they will get this screen. They'll receive a receipt. You'll receive a notification that the participant has signed. And then their receipt will have a customized dashboard for them to go in and see what consent forms they've signed on the platform, as well as potentially change and update those forms. They can update their information. They can delete their data per the GDPR. And yeah, they can just generally see what they've signed, and then you receive a summary seeing what's there. There's also features to add tags to the participant just to help from organizing, or if you are speaking to a participant across several different projects or several different studies, tags are an easy mechanism to organize. So just very quickly on the Knowsi journey so far, Knowsi sprung fully formed from my mind like Athena while landing incredibly jet lagged in Paris, and then built it very quickly before my son showed up. Which was, two projects, like small startup and child at the same time, is challenging. We did a beta test with the Copenhagen Interaction Design School's Interaction Design Master's program, which went quite well. And then it's since been tested and used by design researchers from IDEO, Mozilla, Fjord, Leo Pharma, etc. In 2019, we got we were part of the Shorenstein Center, or the Harvard Kennedy School Shorenstein Center's privacy forecast. And then Sage gave us the concept grant, which I continue to be incredibly grateful for, and has really been a fire under sort of bringing up some of these new changes and also pushing us towards building greater support for the social sciences and academic sector. So one thing always, I'm always looking for testers, and specifically if you're coming from the academic research or researchers min context, please reach out and send me a note. As always, Knowsi will be free to use, but I'm continuously pushing new features and pushing updates. So finding folk who are willing to test those features is something that I'm actively looking for. And then finally, as just sort of a thank you for this time that you've all spent with me, here's a code to use the pro version for basically the rest of the year. And so RESEARCHTRUST, you can do either tier, either the teams or the solo version. And if you don't want to go that route, then Knowsi itself, if you use just the free tier, you'll always get like a number of consents per month for free. And most of the features of the platform will always be free to use. So specifically, we're trying to support students and people running smaller projects in that context. But yeah, so please give that a go.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And we've had quite a few questions come through the question box for Q&A, which we have 10 minutes for now. I think you've actually answered some of them later on, but I was going to crack on now. And if anyone has additional questions, please put them in the box now. And if we've run out of time, we'll do it in the blog afterwards. But no, this is great. And yeah, everyone, we will email out after as well these links, so this Knowsi.com join and the code to get the paid for version 3 months free. And as Andrew said, there's always a free version of Knowsi that you can sign up to today, and we will be sending out the slides and the video recording, etc. So Andrew, a couple of questions that have come in. So first of all, someone has asked, is creating a consent form on Knowsi a complex setup? How does it differ from setting up on Google Forms, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. So one of the pieces with Google Forms is that there's not necessarily a really clear way to manage that, and there's not a clear way for participants to withdraw their consent without contacting the researcher directly. So one of the key ideas behind Knowsi is to have this kind of feedback loop and the participant dashboard, so that participants have greater agency over their own data and what's actually going into the system. Plus, having a system that's custom made and focused on consent forms, I think just makes for a much better experience. The other problem with Google Forms is that a lot of the sort of, I've seen people use Google Forms and Airtable for doing consent forms, and almost none of them are doing it properly. I think it's feasible if you were to sort of like be very specific about the consents that you're trying to gather or similar. But people often get the ePrivacy Act kind of cookie consent rules confused with some of the GDPR focus rules around consent and the withdrawal of consent and the whole cycle there. So it's just a thing to keep in mind. I think it's feasible, but I would definitely recommend using Knowsi because we're better and more specialized.
Of course. And then we have another question here about, can you explain what safeguards are in place to maintain confidentiality?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of security measures that I've put forth on the system. We have a security audit, like a cybersecurity audit from our insurer, Coalition, quite frequently. I'm actually implementing something there's a tool called Detectify, which I'm looking at right now in Sweden, which can also do those kind of additional cybersecurity audits. All data is encrypted at rest, encrypted in transit. There's a bunch of kind of safeguards in the sort of core platform that prevent sharing of data between different API calls and similar. So, that's specifically from a technical standpoint. I think one of the other pieces is that, and I should emphasize this, we don't store participant media. We specifically store the consent forms. And so there's some features that are currently being tested that I'm still trying to make sure whether they're entirely feasible with tools like Google Drive or Dropbox or similar to automatically tag participant data and sort of anonymize it to a certain extent. But we're very focused around storing the consent forms and administering that and making sure that participant information is stored in that way. And then participants always have control over their data, so they can go in, they can request a GDPR deletion. You'll be notified. They'll get a sort of final receipt and similar. So I hope that answers the question. It's kind of, there's the technical side of it, and there's more of the sort of like privacy by design side of it too. Yeah.
No, that makes sense to me. And then another question, which I think kind of ties in a little bit here, is saying if you're giving participants sort of this easy way to withdraw their consent, have you seen higher withdrawal rates, maybe compared, for example, in the projects you've done on Knowsi compared to ones you did before Knowsi with the traditional ways of managing consent?
No, so the ability to rapidly withdraw is more like it's what I was talking about a little bit with the sort of like legislative and just like cultural norms around privacy. So people should have the ability to withdraw their consent. If you think about it on a sort of baseline, it's like, yeah, like of course, like if something is no longer okay, if somebody says no, then it should no longer be okay. And I have not seen much. I haven't actually seen people do it much at all on Knowsi, but having the option is something that increases people's confidence, generally speaking. So it is something that I get asked. I haven't seen a lot of people actually do it. I've seen a lot of people test it. But yeah, and there's when you actually go in and if you go and do a deletion of your information, you're also encouraged, like, you know, if this was a mistake, if you're trying it out, just like reach out to the researcher, here's their email, and just ask them to sign another form, and it's you know, same. But I have received requests in the past not to have either media or specific types of data included before Knowsi existed. So specifically, I did a bunch of research with Planned Parenthood, and in sort of working with that team, some of the nurses sort of reached out and like, hey, like, you know, we just don't feel great about using you know, that specific type of media in this context, and we we're like, totally okay, 100% fine, and you know, we removed it. But I think it would have been easier if they didn't have to go through the whole process of like finding our emails, contacting their superior, like, and all of that. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, I think it does. We've had a very timely follow-up question from Alexandra, somebody else on this as well. So
Great.
Alexandra says she works in public health and has worked with vulnerable populations with whom consent is treated as an ongoing reiterative process that can involve editing, removing points of consent, even during the interview. Alexandra mentioned that on the recruiting cycle that was shown on the slide, it seemed to treat consent as sort of a one-time yes/no decision. How can researchers use a tool like Knowsi while still maintaining the flexibility around consent that's necessary to build trust with participants?
Sure. So maybe I can jump back to that one slide where I had the screenshot of. This form specifically, like participants are able to continuously change their consent over the course of their relationship with the researcher. And so, you know, the example of this in particular, you know, they have a consent form, they go in, they change one of the things that they've consented, either positively or negatively. They include a reason for that consent. They sign it, and it appears just like a message feed on the platform. And that can continuously go on. So you can have an active conversation with your research participant about what it is that they consent to or don't consent to. Knowsi is specifically designed to be used both in person and remotely. So, you know, we've mostly seen it used as a tool where people send the consent form ahead of time and then, you know, go in knowing that something has been agreed to. But, you know, it's also, if you're a researcher, you can have your project window open. You can just click sign this form. You get a prompt to hand it over to the participant, either on your phone or on your iPad or your or any tablet or laptop or whatever. And then, you know, you're able to engage in that consent process in person as well. And the participant will always receive their own individualized receipt. I do know there's qualities to consent in clinical research, which often involve integration with health record systems and similar, which that's something that I think is outside of Knowsi's current scope. And also, I should specifically state, Knowsi is not for use with underage communities or people who are not of the age of majority, simply because we don't have that proper sort of like legal and term structure in place right now, or the proper mechanism for an individual to provide consent on behalf of another. And I think if there's a proper demand for that, then we would do it as well. But yeah, I hope that partially answers the question.
It does. We have 1 minute left, and so we haven't managed to get through all the questions. I'm going to ask you one last one that's coming through a few different people, sort of worded in a slightly different way. And for everyone else, if your question hasn't been answered, we will send that out in the follow-up email with the recording, the slides, etc. And a few people have asked for the template you've got and how to sign up for the newsletter. That will all be sent around. Oh, we're nearly at time. One last question that's come out is saying, does Knowsi have partnerships with any university ethics review boards? We've had Douglas said specifically for European unis that would be a really good tool that could be used sort of institution-wide. We've had someone else say from Australia and also for African universities, saying collaborating with the uni ethics boards could be a good opportunity. Is that in the roadmap? What's going on there?
So absolutely, and this is something that we're actively looking for right now. So I mean, I personally have some contacts at different universities that I've been reaching out to, but Knowsi is a small operation, and so if you are interested or engaged with those organizations, or sort of an administrator on one of those organizations, like, please send me a note. I would love to learn about specifically like what your needs are and how we can support you. Because the express goal of Knowsi is that, like, this tool came up from a design community, product design community need. But what I've continuously heard is that, the need exists, I think, much more expressly in the academic community. And so I'm very actively working towards, with the help of Sage, to bring Knowsi towards the academic community and support you all as best I can. So yeah, if you would like to use Knowsi in the context of your REB, give me a shout. You have my email.
Yep, I will send around the sort of contact forms, etc., and links as well. We're at time today, so sorry for everyone whose conversation we couldn't quite finish. Whose question we couldn't answer today. We will send around a follow-up of anything we missed, and also a recording of the webinar and the slides, and a couple of other links that people have asked for. Thank you very much, Andrew, for today, and for everyone for attending. Please remember, everyone, you can go and sign up for Knowsi for free today at knowsi.com/join, and you can also get the pro version for 3 months using the code RESEARCHTRUST. We'll send that around as well in the follow-up email that will come in 2 days' time. So thanks, Andrew, and thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.